You're dying, not metaphorically, not in the way you say, "I'm dying," when someone sends you a meme at 2 in the morning. Actually dying. Your heart has stopped. Your brain is running out of oxygen. And somewhere in the few minutes between biological death and whatever comes next, something is happening inside your head that no one has been able to fully explain. And the accounts from the people who came back, the ones who flatlined and got dragged back by a defibrillator or a very determined paramedic, are so consistent, so specific, and so weird that dismissing them as hallucinations stopped being a satisfying answer a long time ago. This is what we actually know about crossing over, not what religion says, not what your aunt who reads tarot cards says, what the research says. And the research, and it's out, is genuinely fascinating. Let's start with the basics. Near-death experiences, or NDEs, are not rare. That's the first thing most people get wrong. Somewhere between 4 and 5% of the entire global population has reported one. That's hundreds of millions of people. They happen across cultures, across centuries, across wildly different religious frameworks. A Christian in rural Alabama and a Buddhist monk in Thailand and a secular cardiologist in the Netherlands are all describing something that rhymes. Not identical, but structurally similar in ways that are hard to chalk up to coincidence or cultural contamination. The core features show up everywhere: a sense of leaving the body, moving through a dark tunnel, an encounter with overwhelming light, a feeling of profound peace, a life review, and, frequently, a decision or a boundary that sends them back. That's not one tradition's mythology, that's the pattern. Now here's where the skeptic in you should be paying attention, because the easy answer is that NDEs are just the brain misfiring under extreme stress. Oxygen deprivation causes hallucinations. Dying brains release chemicals. The tunnel of light is just the visual cortex shutting down from the edges inward. There's a version of this argument that sounds very convincing until you actually go through the clinical literature and hit the part where things stop making sense. Because some NDE accounts include verified external information. People who were clinically dead, with no measurable brain activity, reported watching their own resuscitation from above the room, describing specific details, the placement of equipment, what a nurse said, what color someone's shoes were, details they had no sensory access to and no business knowing. These aren't anecdotes. They've been documented in peer-reviewed journals. Pam Reynolds, the AWARE study, Dr. Pim van Lommel's landmark prospective study, published in the Lancet in 2001. This is not fringe material. The Van Lommel study is worth sitting with for a second. He tracked 344 cardiac arrest patients in the Netherlands over several years. 62 of them reported NDEs. All of them had been clinically dead. All of them had flat EEGs, meaning no detectable brainwave activity during the episode. And yet they came back with coherent, detailed, emotionally loaded memories of experiences during the window when their brains were, by any measurable standard, not producing consciousness. Van Lommel didn't call it proof of an afterlife. He was careful, but he said something striking. He said the data suggested that consciousness might not be produced by the brain. It might simply be received by the brain. Like a radio picking up a signal. Damage the radio, and the signal appears to stop. But that doesn't mean the signal is gone. That metaphor matters, because it's the crux of one of the biggest unresolved questions in the entire field. What researchers sometimes call the hard problem of consciousness. The hard problem, first named by philosopher David Chalmers in 1995, is essentially this. Why does subjective experience exist at all? We can map every neuron. We can watch brain scans light up in real time. We can identify which clusters of cells activate when you feel fear or pleasure or recognize a face. But none of that explains why there is something it feels like to be you. Why you experience redness instead of just processing the wavelength 700 nanometers. The gap between brain activity and inner experience is enormous, and nothing in conventional neuroscience has closed it. And that gap is exactly where NDE researchers park their most interesting questions. Let's talk about the life review, because this one doesn't get enough attention. Across thousands of NDE accounts, people describe a moment where their entire life plays back, not like a highlight reel, more like a full immersive re-experience of every significant moment, including the moments they're least proud of, but with a twist. They don't just relive what they did, they relive what other people felt because of what they did. You feel the kindness you showed a stranger as that stranger felt it. You feel the cruelty too. People come back from this experience profoundly changed, not philosophically nudged, structurally changed. Long-term follow-up studies show reduced fear of death, increased compassion, decreased materialism, sometimes dramatic personality shifts, and a near-universal loss of interest in status, achievement, and all the things most people spend their lives chasing. The life review doesn't just play your memories back, it appears to restructure your values. Here's the thing nobody really talks about though. Not all NDEs are blissful. A meaningful percentage of them are terrifying. Estimates range from 10 to 20% of NDE reports describe what researchers call distressing NDEs, sometimes called hellish NDEs, which involve a sense of profound aloneness, a void with no exit, or encounters with deeply threatening presences. These are dramatically underreported. People who've had them are often ashamed, confused, or afraid they'll be dismissed or judged. Researchers like Dr. Barbara Romer spent years specifically collecting these accounts. What she found is that even distressing NDEs tend to produce transformation afterward. Fear doesn't always come back with them, but questions always do. Now, what actually happens to consciousness at the moment of death? Here's an interesting piece of data that came out of a 2023 study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. Researchers at the University of Michigan monitored brain activity in dying cardiac arrest patients. They found a surge of highly organized gamma wave activity right at the moment of cardiac arrest. Gamma waves are associated with waking consciousness, dreaming, and moments of insight. This surge was localized in areas of the brain linked to visual processing and heightened attention. In other words, something in the brain activated intensely at the exact moment the body was shutting down. Whether that accounts for NDE experiences or is simply correlated with them is genuinely unknown, but it suggests the transition isn't quiet. Something is happening. Let's talk about what comes after the crossing, because the accounts get more specific than most people expect. The beings of light described in NDEs are remarkably consistent. An overwhelming luminosity, a sense of unconditional recognition, not judgment, not interrogation, recognition, like being known completely, including the parts you've hidden from yourself and accepted anyway. People who've had this encounter frequently describe it as more real than anything they've experienced in ordinary life, not dreamlike, the opposite, hyper-real, more vivid, more stable, more textured than waking reality, which is a genuinely strange thing to say about an experience that happens when your brain has stopped functioning. There's also the matter of what people are told, or shown, or understand during the crossing. A consistent theme involves the idea that love is the only currency that matters, not in a greeting card way, in a very specific, structural way, that what persists, what carries forward, is essentially the relational residue of a life, how you treated people, what you gave, whether you were present. The life review isn't grading your career achievements or your tax returns. It's measuring something else entirely, and people who come back from that evaluation tend to reorganize their lives around whatever that something else is. The question of what the destination actually looks like varies more than the journey does. Some accounts describe vast landscapes, others describe cities of light, others describe nothing spatial at all, just states of awareness without any physical analogy. What they agree on more consistently is the emotional quality. Peace is almost universal. So is an absence of the chronic background anxiety that most people carry through their entire lives without ever naming it. The weight lifts. People describe feeling, for the first time, completely okay, and understanding that they always were. Then, usually, something happens. A presence indicates they need to return. Sometimes they're told it isn't their time. Sometimes they simply understand that something is unfinished, something involving people they love, something that requires a body and a heartbeat and another decade on Earth. What you do with all of this depends entirely on what you already believe, which is maybe the most honest thing to say about it. The data is real, the accounts are real, the transformations are real and documented. Whether they constitute evidence of a literal afterlife or a very profound neurological phenomenon is a question science hasn't settled and may not settle in our lifetimes. But here's what the research does seem to suggest, consistently, across decades of careful clinical work. The transition isn't a wall, it's more like a door. What's on the other side? What language is adequate for it? What it means for how you live now? Those are questions that keep coming back with everyone who crosses over and returns to tell anyone at all.